Hey everybody, it is a blessing to be with you tonight. We are going to make our way through Revelation chapter 10, and maybe just kind of to remind ourselves as we continually go through the book, we're probably going through the most difficult book in the Bible. That's arguable, but at least one of the most difficult texts to work through in the Bible. There are spots that people, it seems like they have never agreed on. When you go back and you read through the early believers and the historical writings we've got where they're trying to grapple with these different signs and symbols. We're going to see one tonight with this mighty angel that comes in chapter 10. Nobody has ever agreed on who this angel is. There's a huge debate all throughout history. And so when we're going through Revelation, the important thing is not to figure out necessarily what each one of the signs and symbols or pictures represent, not even necessarily to figure out the particular applications or the particular meanings of these things as they're happening. What we are concerned with as the people of God is the application of these things for today. The book of Revelation is not written about modern events. There is a coming day of the Lord, which it does look forward to, but it is not written about the relations between Russia and China and the United States and the UN, and it's not about that stuff. But what we do have in Revelation is application. We see the way God works with nations. We see the way that God deals with those who he blesses when they're unfaithful, and so then we begin to make applications based on that book. And in that way, these images in Revelation, these prophetic pictures, they roll forward. And so while the book is not written about what's going on today, it certainly has application to today, and that makes Revelation a tool, something that we need to read, and we need to study, and we need to understand. It's important, or God wouldn't have given it to us, and so we need to have that tool in our toolbox so that we can use God's word to be faithful believers, living the way that he would have us to live, being the people he would have us to be. And so with that kind of as an introduction, let's read our text, and then we'll dive in and start off looking at some of the trumpets. So here's our Bible. Revelation chapter 10, verse 1. This is the English Standard Version. If you've got one, you can follow along. Then I saw another mighty angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud, with a rainbow over his head, and his face was like the sun, and his legs like pillar of fire, literally his feet like pillars of fire. He had a little scroll open in his hand, and he set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he called out with a loud voice like a lion roaring. And when he called out, the seven thunders sounded. And when the seven thunders had sounded, I was about to write. But I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Seal up what the seven thunders have said. Do not write it down." And the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand to heaven and swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay. Let's get verse 7. But in the days of that trumpet call to be sounded by the seventh angel, the mystery of God would be fulfilled, just as announced to his servants the prophets. Then the voice that I heard from heaven spoke to me again, saying, "Go, take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel who is standing on the sea and on the land." So I went to the angel and told him to give me the little scroll. And he said to me, "Take and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey." And I took the little scroll from the hand of the angel and ate it, and it was sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach was made bitter. And I was told, "You must again prophesy about many peoples and nations and languages and kings." And that's chapter 10. So as we're kind of looking at what's going on here, we're waiting for that final trumpet blast. We're waiting for it to come. In the days of that seventh trumpet call to be sounded by that seventh angel, there's some stuff that's going to happen. That's chapter 11. So join us next week, and we'll see what the final trumpet blast brings. But here, in the meantime, John has kind of changed locations. He was in heaven, and now he's not, seemingly. But he sees this angel descend from the heavens, stand on the land and the sea, has the scroll in his hand. John's going to go eat the scroll, and then he's going to hear the angel swear this oath. And so there's quite a bit of detail here, but it's not involved in any of the trumpet blasts. This is, again, kind of like an interlude, something that we're seeing between the action that's going on. And so let's just kind of look at what we've been dealing with and some of the things that we've been seeing and kind of work through these trumpets and these woes. These last three trumpet blasts are the woes, so 5, 6, and 7. And when we're thinking about these, they're judgments that are coming. And they're coming against a particular people, and we're going to see, I think, a very clear identifier in chapter 11. It's the city in which the Lord was killed. And so that's Jerusalem. And so we've got these judgments that are coming against the people of God. But that doesn't mean that everything that is written in the book is only and always about Jerusalem, because there's going to be another player in here, at the very least another player, the one who comes in judgment against Jerusalem, and that would be the Roman Empire and all of the nations that make up the Roman Empire. And so these are judgments that are coming. And however we understand them, we have to understand them in that way. There are judgments that are coming against somebody, and they're not going to be delayed any longer. It's our oath from the angel here. So as we're going through here, another thing we need to remember is that this is all happening soon. At the beginning of the book, we're told that these things which are being shown to us are things which are going to happen soon, right? They're shortly to come to pass. We see this phrase throughout the New Testament. Jesus is saying things like the kingdom of God is at hand. And when he says that, the outside of that phrase, right, the length of time that you could ascribe to that phrase would be about 10 years. If Jesus starts his ministry 10 years before his crucifixion, that's the biggest gap that I've ever seen there, so 10 years. So you're dealing with a span of time that is less than 10 years. It's about to happen, right? It's at hand. If one of your friends were to tell you, hey, we're about to go do this, you wouldn't expect that 100 years later they would go do it, right? It's imminent. And so whatever is happening in the book is imminent, which means whether you pick a date before 70 or before 100 AD, whatever the book is about, it's proximal to the first century, right? These things are happening in the first century. And so what we have in the book is there's no longer future events that Revelation was predicting, right? This is not a roadmap to the end times, as I've heard some people say. This is about historical events that are happening and have happened. But again, remember, it's that prophetic language that rolls forward. Just like the prophets in ancient Israel, when they would prophesy, there was an immediate need that is being met by their prophetic utterance. But that utterance also rolls forward. And so while the events that Revelation is written about happened soon to the people who get this letter, there is an application for those of us today. And you could say that about just about everything that's written in the Bible. It had an immediate fulfillment, an immediate application, or immediate meaning, but there is this rolling forward of the message, of the application for people today. Another thing, well, we've talked about that. Another thing is that we're dealing with highly symbolic language here. My favorite is the locusts, right? I always come back to chapter 9 with these crazy locusts. One of the things that is mentioned about them is they sound like the noise of many chariots. And so people will come and they'll take this image and they'll kind of pluck it out of its context, and they'll say these flying beings that sound really loud, it must be choppers. And so we're looking at some kind of airborne warfare. But if you stick in the prophets, which I'm going to highly suggest we do when we're trying to understand the book of Revelation, this isn't our license to run about and try and just nab images or events from all over history. We need to keep our feet planted in the text of Scripture, planted in the words of the prophets. And the reason why is the angel's going to tell us why in just a little bit. So if we stick in the prophets, you have Ezekiel, who much of Revelation, the pictures are drawn from Ezekiel. And we'll turn over there. In Ezekiel chapter 1, let's notice this about some beings that Ezekiel sees. So we turn our Bible over to Ezekiel chapter 1. It says, as they went, all right, and these are creatures around the throne, the living creatures. As they went, I heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult, like the sound of an army. Right? He's going to say some more about them in chapter 10. There's another set of spiritual beings, and here we go. The sound of the wings of the cherubim was heard as far as the outer court, like the voice of the God Almighty when he speaks. So I would suggest that the reason why you've got these locusts with these wings that make this noise is not because they're telling us about choppers or some other military equipment, but because they are spiritual beings. And when these beings move about, the image that we get in the Scriptures is that these spiritual beings make incredible noise when they move. And so more than likely what we've got in these locusts are demons who are released by Apollyon, the destroyer, and they are set loose, right? And they come out, and this is a demonic assault that is taking place with the sixth trumpet blast. And so very likely just sticking in the biblical text and looking for the prophets to give us meaning and explanation to these signs, that's what we see. And so I think that that's a much better explanation. And that's something that is applicable to all people in all times. Anytime the powers of darkness are at work, here you go. This is what's going on. There is a sense in which God will use these demons to punish, to bring judgment, to cause destruction, where those things are warranted and where they are due. And so that's an important message for us. It's an important theme for us to keep in mind, especially as we move into our next section. And we're going to start off looking at verses 1 through 3, where we've got this mighty angel who comes and he's going to stand on the sea and on the land. So over in Revelation chapter 10, in verse 1, we've got this mighty angel coming down from heaven. Here he's wrapped in this cloud. He's got a rainbow over his head. His face is like the sun. Feet, not legs. Your translation probably says legs because they just assume that it's talking about his whole leg. But his feet like pillars of fire. He had the scroll in his hand. He's going to stand on the sea and the land, and then he'll call out with this voice like a lion. So what's going on here? What is happening in the text when we see these things? The first thing that we need to notice is in chapter 9, we had an angel who was fallen, and here we have an angel who is descending or coming down. That's an important distinction. This is probably not a fallen angel, right? I mean, the description of him, he just doesn't seem like a fallen angel. He's not a bad guy. He sounds too much like God to be a bad guy with this description. And so what you have is, just like Jesus will say over in the Gospel of John, that you'll see the angels ascending and descending. Here is an angel who is descending, who is coming down. Jesus himself in the scriptures, we're told that Jesus has come down. Whereas Satan, in Luke chapter 11, verses 18 and 19, Satan doesn't come down. Satan is cast out and falls down, right? Jesus will say, I saw him falling like lightning. And so here, this angel isn't being cast out of heaven. He's descending. He's a good guy. Those details, right? These details are important to the picture. It's going to help us figure out who or what this being is and what role is being played for us here in the text. Is this a bad guy? Is this a good guy? What's going on? And so again, we've got all sorts of evidence that we could look at with falling versus descending, but I think we've covered enough to see that we're dealing with an angel of the Lord here, or one of God's angels, who is coming down, at least as is being presented to us in the text, who is coming down to the earth with a message. And so then if we start looking at the description of the angel, this is why there's debate. And I looked up in the early writers, the early fathers of Christianity, and it's not a 50-50 split, but it's like a 60-40, 70-30. So there's not agreement as to who this angel is. And we'll talk more about that in just a second. But as we start reading these descriptions, who do you think it sounds like? That's important, because this is supposed to not only conjure up in your mind this image, this picture that you're seeing of this angel, but it's also supposed to begin linking texts together for you. And one of the difficulties that we have going through these pictures is that, first off, we often don't know the Old Testament well like we should. We don't know it well enough, and so some of the images and pictures are missed on us, right? And I say that to my shame. We don't know the Old Testament as well as we should. The second problem is that we don't understand the Old Testament necessarily in the same way that the people in the first century would, right? They had a particular way that they dealt with these texts, and so when John references these things, or when they're shown to us, they understood, right? They got the message, and so we, 2,000 years later, are working, trying to get that same message. We're trying to go back, kind of sit in their seat, hear the way they would have heard, use the texts that they would have used to put these things together. It's a lot of work, and it's difficult, but the rewards are worth it. And often people will come to Revelation and they'll say, well, it's so confusing, I can't make my way through it. Well, it is confusing. I imagine that if Revelation had been written before 2 Peter, instead of saying our brother Paul, who writes some things that are difficult to understand, he would have said our brother John, who wrote that crazy book Revelation that nobody understands, right? He would have said that instead, right? It is difficult, but don't be discouraged. If we work through it and we look at the images and we use the prophets to explain, we can get a handle on it. We can get a good feel for it at the very least. So this angel is described to us, and the first thing that we see is he's mighty. There's another mighty angel, and he's over in chapter 5, right? So Revelation chapter 5, there's this mighty angel who comes. We can look really quick at the text over there. We don't want to spend too much time because we don't have a lot of time. So then I saw on the right hand of him who is seated on the throne. Here's God sitting in the throne, and a mighty angel, verse 2, proclaiming with a loud voice. So very similar. We've got this one in chapter 10 with the voice of a lion. Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals? And in that text, we're going to see that the one who opens the scroll is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. That's what John hears. He hears Lion of the tribe of Judah, but when he turns and looks, he sees a lamb who is slain but yet is alive. So this angel in chapter 5 is not Jesus. this mighty angel. So when we get to chapter 10, and we've got this similar description, looking back to the text, we've already got an indicator that is probably not Jesus. Why? Well, there's a couple reasons. The first 2 chapters in the book of Hebrews are really bent on getting you to understand, especially chapter 1, they're really bent on getting you to understand that Jesus is better than the angels. It would seem awfully confusing, wouldn't it, when you get to the book of Revelation and all of a sudden Jesus is called an angel? That's already a problem. It's that people are already struggling to see God, to see Jesus, the divine Son of God, as being higher than the angels. I don't know that John would convolute that. So we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but here is a mighty angel. Mighty angel chapter 5, mighty angel chapter 10. He's big, he's strong, he's powerful. And this word mighty is used all throughout the text to talk about God, to talk about other spiritual beings, to talk about people, to talk about nations. It just means really, really strong. It isn't a word that is particularly reserved for divinity. Right? So this word can be used to describe anybody. The next thing we see is that our angel is wrapped in clouds. And this does tend to be associated more with divinity. God comes in the glory cloud. He's got the pillar of cloud that leads the people. His glorious presence fills the temple, and it's cloudy. Nobody can go in. And so the glory cloud does seem to be associated more with divinity. But as you start looking through the text, there are angels who are associated with clouds too. And the reason why that is the case is because often an angel of the Lord will come and do something, and God is said to be doing it. For example, in Exodus chapter 3, let's look over there. We've got the burning bush. Moses is going to come up to the bush, and it says that God is speaking from the bush, right? That's in the text. The Lord spoke to Moses. But when you go and you look in Exodus chapter 3, in verse 2 it says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of the bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush was not burning. And then, verse 4, right? When the Lord saw that he turned aside, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses." So is it an angel or is it God? And this is where people will try and argue that the angel of the Lord is the pre-incarnate Christ or the Holy Spirit or something like that. But if you just look at the text, right, don't try and assign meaning to it. Just look at what it says. There is an angel in the bush, and the angel does something, and it says that God is doing it. That's important. There's another place where this happens. We say, right, that God goes before Israel in the pillar of cloud. But when we look at what is happening in that pillar of cloud, it is also said that an angel moves it. An angel moves the cloud. And so, who is it? Is it an angel moving the cloud? Is it God in the cloud? Is it God in the bush? Or is it an angel in the bush? And all of a sudden, this thing that seemed maybe more clear at the beginning is not quite as clear. But it's not a big deal because the Israelites would have assumed that if an angel was doing something, it's because God sent them and God did it anyway. Jacob, for example, is going to wrestle with God. But then the prophet Hosea says that Jacob wrestled with an angel. Well, who is it? Is it God or an angel? Pick one. You don't have to pick one. Right? If an angel does it, an angel sent by the Lord, then God did it. And so this isn't a problem for the Israelites. They don't see an issue here with calling an angel doing something, saying that God did it. Stephen, over in Acts chapter 7, he's going to argue with the Israelites, and he's going to say, "You who received the law as though delivered by angels." And it's interesting that when you go and you look, here's an angel moving the glory cloud. We'll just look. In verse 19, the angel of God who was going before the host of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved along with the angel. And we've also got instances where Stephen says that it is an angel who delivered the law to you. And if you go back and look in the text, there is an angel there present on the mountain. So is it an angel or God? It's not as clear as we would like it to be. And so the fact that you've got this glory cloud or this cloud wrapped around the angel, yeah, there are lots of images where you can go. There's Daniel where you have the Son of Man ascending in the cloud, Jesus saying that you'll see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of his glory. You have God on the mountain, but you have the angels doing all of these things too. And so it's just not quite as cut and dry as we would like it to be. And that is why the book of Revelation is so difficult to understand sometimes. So the next thing we see, we've got this mighty angel. He's wrapped in clouds. He's got a rainbow. And this rainbow is over his head. Literally, the text says an iris over his head, so a round thing over his head. Have you ever seen like Byzantine paintings or Orthodox paintings where you have the little person and they're sitting there and then they've got this thing around their head? And we call it a halo. Well, in Greek, the word here is iris, and it's, the thing in your eye, the round circle. And so what they did is they drew irises around people who were holy, right? God's holy ones, the saints that you see in the text. And so when they had a painting of somebody who was one of the Lord's holy ones, they would put an iris around them to kind of indicate that. It's very much in the Bible. Here is a man coming down, or an angel coming down, and he has this iris around his head, very much like those Byzantine paintings that you may or may not be familiar with. So here he's got this iris around him. The English text says rainbow, and that causes many people to go, oh, the rainbow, Genesis 9. God is associated with rainbows. He puts his bow in the cloud. The problem is this is written to a Greek audience, and in the Septuagint, the word that is used in Genesis 9 is a completely different word than the word that is used here for rainbow. There would be no association at all. If you read and spoke Greek and you got this letter from John and you saw this iris around the head of the angel, you would not go, oh, Genesis chapter 9, the rainbow. It's not the same thing. And that's difficult for us to hear as English speakers because, look, it's the same word. But in the original language, it's not. And so actually, this is one of those moments where it's really exciting because you begin to realize that this is something different. And we're not dealing with that covenant. You're dealing with some different image, and the image that you're dealing with is chapter 4, where you come into the throne room, and there is the mighty one seated on the throne, and he's got this emerald iris around himself. And so you see in this angel reflections of divinity, and you see the servants of God becoming like God. Right? At the very least, that's what we see. And that's exciting because you and I, as the Lord's servants, we can become like him. We take on, the more we become like God, the more we're linked to the Father through the Son, by the power of the Spirit, the more we are with the Lord, the more like the Lord we become. And one day we will be made like Jesus, right? We will be raised with a body like his. And so that's exciting to see that the servants of God become like God. They take on his attributes. And so here we've got this angel coming down. He's got this iris around his head. His face is like the sun. And again, shining faces, right? We would say, oh, well, shining faces, God is shining. You can see later in the book of Revelation in chapter 21, 22, that there's no sun because God is the light. And we might then want to associate this angel with the Lord because here's shining face. But there is a very famous person whose face also shone after an encounter with the Lord. Moses comes down from the mountain after receiving the law, and all of a sudden, he's got a shining face. Let's look over in Exodus chapter 34, verse 29. Exodus 34, and Moses came down from the Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand as he came down from the mountain. Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come near him. So now Moses comes down the mountain, and the picture that you're getting here is not that his face it was a little glowy, but I mean, you kind of get the idea that it's shining brightly. Why? Because he had been in the presence of God. And here is this angel in Revelation chapter 10 coming down out of heaven, and his face is shining brightly. Why? Maybe because he had been in the presence of God. It also is, right? It also could be a description of divinity. The next thing that you're going to see is that he's got these legs or these feet like pillars of fire. The reason why it's probably feet, right? We're trying to picture what's going on here, is I imagine that when he steps on the sea and when he steps on the land, the flames come up, right? That seems to be the image. Many translations will take that word foot and they'll replace leg because it's easier to see a leg as a pillar. And people will try and make this say bronze, but it doesn't say bronze, it says fire. Now, it could be a reference to bronze. Sometimes bronze will be talking molten bronze, a glowing bronze, fiery bronze. Sometimes you'll see those things in the text. And so people will try and liken it back to the pillars in the temple, right? To the 2 pillars. Boaz is one of their names. I forgot their names for a second. I'll remember it, and then we'll talk about it again. All right, so Jachin and Boaz, the names of these pillars in the temple that the Jews saw as being the legs of God, right? All the way up to the heavens, they imagined that these pillars went. And so there is this sense in which that could be what we're seeing here, these legs of bronze, very similar to what we see over in chapter 1, to what you see over in Daniel chapter 10, these other images of these beings. But it could also be that when his feet touch the ground, flames come up. right? And that seems to be more like what the text is telling us, and that would be an allusion back to the wilderness where you have the pillar of fire by night. And so if that's the case, you've got the clouds and the fire, all these images from the Exodus account. And that's really significant because in chapter 11, you're about to find out that there is a new Egypt. So keep here at the beginning, right? We've just seen plagues that mirror the plagues in Egypt, and now we've got this angel coming down with all of these Exodus images around him also. So the Exodus is at the forefront of this image. So the next thing we see is he's got this little scroll in his hand, and it's open. It's not sealed shut. It's open in his hand. He's got his foot on the sea and his left foot on the land, and then he's going to cry out with the voice of a lion. So his face is shining like the sun. He's got these fiery feet. Who is this angel? Well, I told you earlier that the earliest writers that we have who tried to sit down and kind of identify the things in the book are split probably 60, 40, 70, 30 in favor of this being Jesus. That's basically how they saw it. They saw this angel come down and they said, oh, it's Jesus. It's a picture of Jesus. I tend to lean in the other direction. And the reason why I lean in the other direction is because making a distinction between Jesus and the angels is so important in all of the other places of the Bible. It just seems a mistake to convolute the two in Revelation. And that could be a terrible reason. But for me, that is such an important part of the book of Hebrews, that Jesus is better than the angels. Jesus is higher than the angels. God has bestowed upon him a name much higher than theirs. And so then why would John, knowing those things, come along or why would God, knowing those things, come along and then convolute that by telling us Jesus is an angel? That doesn't make sense to me. There's such a disharmony there in those two statements and those two ideas that I tend to lean in the idea that this is just an angel. Right, just an angel. It's an incredibly powerful, mighty angel. It reflects the characteristics of his creator. In a sense, a spiritual image, an icon, a spiritual icon of God, very much like we existing in the physical realm are icons, images of the creator. And so that seems to be what you're getting here. This is an angelic servant of the Lord, reflecting his creator, his master, in all of these ways. And when he comes down, he is a holy one, sent on a mission, fulfilling, making known, making real the will of God among the creation. That seems to be what's going on. Both of those opinions have been held at various times. Sometimes one is more popular than the other. It doesn't matter, right, which one you choose. And that's another thing that makes me lean toward this being an angel. In Revelation chapter 5, Jesus being that lion of the tribe of Judah, Jesus being that lamb that was slain and yet living is intensely important. Right? If it's just some angel there, then it ruins the gospel. And so I would kind of argue that if you get to a passage and the identity of this messenger isn't a really significant thing, then it's probably more likely to be an angel rather than God himself. Right? The one seated on the throne in chapter 4, if that's not God, we've got some problems. Because there's one seat in the temple and God has always been there. And so the one seated on the throne is divinity. It's God the Father. The lamb who was slain yet lives, who comes in worthy to break the seals, that had better be Jesus, or the gospel breaks apart. And so here, where the identity of this messenger doesn't really seem significant, that would again make me lean toward this being an angel. But like I said, both have been determined by different people, different times. So as we go through, he's got this scroll. His feet are on different places. And when John sees this little book, he uses this word that was not in existence before. And so if you like language, this is really cool. What we've got here is a brand new word that the Apostle John created to tell this story. So when he's trying to communicate to people what he saw, he makes up a word. And that's okay to do. William Shakespeare made up all kinds of words. The Apostle Paul will make up words. When he's dealing with a new concept or when he's trying to describe something to people who don't really know what they're doing, he'll take different things and kind of mush them together and give them this concept in a brand new word. Germans love to do that. Germans take two words and mush them together and get new words all the time. English speakers like to do that. We love compound words. And so that's what John is doing. He's taking this idea of a little book and he's showing you, he's emphasizing the fact that it's small. And so whatever this is not the big scroll that was in the hand of him who is seated on the throne. This is something else. And so it's not related necessarily to the seals being broken. This could be some additional thing that John is going to deal with as we go. And so what is this book? Up until this point, this word didn't exist, and all that we know that John intended for this to mean is that it's a small book, and it's open, and John's going to get to, well, he'll eat it. He's going to get to know what is in it. So then this angel cries out with a loud voice like a lion. And here's another cool thing that we've got, like a lion roaring. That word for roaring is actually onomatopoeia. It sounds like a lion roaring, very much like we've got the eagle earlier crying out, whoa, 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 and it sounds like an eagle screeching. Here we've got a word that sounds like a roaring lion. And so it's really poetic. It's very vivid imagery. And we've got all of these things working for us in the text so that you're supposed to see and feel and hear what's going on. And so this lion roaring, in response to that roaring lion, there are going to be 7 thunders that sound. And some people will talk about this lion, and they will say, oh, well, it's a lion, and the lion of the tribe of Judah, so this must be Jesus, this one calling out with a lion's voice. And that's true, right? We see the lion of the tribe of Judah. That reference is made in Revelation chapter 5. You've got Genesis 49, 9, and 10, where you have the prophecy about Judah being a lion. But in the New Testament, lions are mentioned 3 times. One is the flying creature that looks like a lion. One is Satan in 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. Satan goes around like a prowling lion. And the third time, aside from this passage, is the lion of the tribe of Judah. So out of the 3 other times that lion is used, 2 of those 3 is referring to a spiritual being that is not Jesus. So it's very likely that this angel with the lion's voice, well, I don't want to say very likely. It's not necessary for this angel to be Jesus just because he's got a lion's voice, because Satan roars like a lion too, and he's certainly not Jesus. We've got that living creature that looks like a lion, and so the lion imagery doesn't necessarily mean divinity. And so again, that's why history is kind of divided over the question. Now he calls out, these thunders resound. They come back. They're sounding back, almost like an echo. This loud roar, and the echo back are these 7 thunders. The 7, the divine thunder, right? God comes down on the mountain. What is there? There's thunder. The appearance of God comes, and there's these rumblings and earthquakes and shakings. And so here now is this divine response to the voice of this angel. And John hears these 7 thunders when they sound, and he gets out his pen, and he's going to write them down, and he's told, no, you don't get to write these down. In verse 4, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the 7 thunders have said and do not write it down. And so now we're back in Daniel, right? We're back where Daniel sees a vision, and Daniel is going to go write it down, and he doesn't, right? He doesn't write it down. And so all of a sudden, what we've got here is we have to kind of figure out what's going on with these thunders and why would it be sealed up? Well, if we go back and we think about Daniel, if we look at what's going on in Daniel, there's judgments coming. In Daniel chapter 8 and verse 26, Daniel is told to seal up the vision because it was about the future. It's many days away. In Daniel chapter 12, we can look at some of these. In Daniel chapter 12 and verse 4, Daniel is told to seal them up because it's about the future, right? Until the time of the end. In verse 9, he's going to be told the same thing. He said, go your way, Daniel. These words are shut up and sealed until the end of time, there in verse 9. And so what we've got here is something that is spoken that doesn't seem to be pertinent to the immediacy of the rest of Revelation. And so whatever these thunders uttered is about some future event. It seems to be, if we're dealing with Daniel the same way or Revelation the same way that Daniel was spoken to. So whatever is sealed up is for something in the future, and we don't necessarily know what that is. Perhaps it's the second part of Revelation, and it is after these judgments that are coming. Perhaps it could be something that was sealed up, and we'll get to know about it after the last day. Right? It's impossible to speculate. And so we have to be very careful when we get to these things. All we know is that there was some thundering, and Daniel or John is told not to write about it. Well, why the thundering? Why is that significant? Yeah, not only is it God's presence, not only do we see God's presence when we're dealing with thunder, but there's also God's judgments. right? You will be visited. Here's a judgment coming. You'll be visited by the Lord of hosts with thunder, with earthquake, with noise, whirlwind, tempest, flame of devouring fire. The multitude of nations, all the nations will fight against Ariel, and that fight against her and her stronghold will distress her. It will be like a dream, a vision of the night. Daniel's night visions. Here are these destructions, right? They're coming as thunder. God's judgments come as thunder. You're going to see this again. Isaiah chapter 29, verse 11. The vision of this has become like the words of a book that is sealed. When men give it to one who can read, saying, read this, I cannot, for it is sealed. And they give it to another who cannot read it, saying, read this. And he said, I can't read. Right? And the reason why is because these people, the Israelites, the people in Jerusalem, they have drawn near with their mouth. They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In other words, they're not faithful to God. So God's judgments are coming to them in these thunderings, but they've been sealed up, as Daniel will read, or Daniel shows us, until the time of the end. And so now we've got John with the same thing. Here are these judgments that are coming, but they're sealed up until the time of the end. Judgments against whom? What is the content? I don't know. It could be the second part of Revelation. It could be something else. Now here, this is why it's so difficult. We have a feeling for what it means, but we don't have all the details, and that's fine. We don't need all the details. We just need to know how to apply these things. We come back to our angel, and what we're going to see is our angel now is standing on the sea and on the land. And probably what this is in reference to is the Gentiles and the Jews, right? The Jews and Gentiles. In the prophets, it's very, very common to talk about the Gentiles as being the ocean, right? The sea. It's very common to refer to Israel as the land, referring back to the promised land. And interestingly enough, this is a really important picture, because when you get later in the book of Revelation, people talk about, what heaven will be like, and they have these images and these visions of what it will be like in the new heavens and the new earth. And some people say, I hope there's a beach there. I would love to sit on the beach and talk theology with Paul or Moses or whatever, right? And so we've got these ideas. I hope that's not yours, because in Revelation 22, there's no more sea. It's gone. And I'm kind of chuckling, because if we take it literally, right, that could be like the worst news of your life. You're like, oh, I wanted to sit on the beach with Paul. And now you find out that in Revelation, there's no sea, right? So in Revelation 21, I think I said 22 earlier. It's Revelation 22. I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven, first earth had passed away, and the sea is no more. Oh, there's no beaches. There's no lakes. We don't get to we don't get to go fishing. Except I don't think that it's that. The sea are the Gentiles. In this new heavens and new earth, there are no Gentiles. Why? Because everybody who is there is part of this new holy city that is coming down out of heaven, right? Here's the sea is no more. And then immediately after that, there is a holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Everybody in this new city is one of God's holy ones. Everyone is a Jew inwardly, as the Apostle Paul would say. And so the reason why there's no sea is because in this picture, there's no more Gentiles. And so here in Revelation chapter 10, what we've got is this angel who comes down, and he has his foot, one on the Gentiles and one on Israel, and this message is for the whole world. He's coming down. There is judgment coming, and it is going to affect everybody. And ultimately, that's what the gospel is about, right? The gospel is about drawing all people to God, and judgment ultimately will come upon Jew and Gentile, right? Those who reject the Lord. There are various times in history where we're here with Revelation. If it's about the destruction of Jerusalem, we've got the Gentiles coming as a flood, overwhelming Jerusalem. And the way the prophets work is they talk about these destroyers who come, Babylon, this destroying mountain, who then in turn is itself destroyed. And so this angel with one foot firmly in Jerusalem, one foot firmly on the Gentile nations, calling about these judgments that are coming and will not be stopped. It could be a reference to coming destruction and judgment, not only on Israel for rejecting the Messiah, but also upon the nation that will come in judgment. We'll see. We'll have to work through the rest of the book. So we've got that really powerful, really cool picture of this angel seal up the vision. You don't get to hear these things. And then the angel is going to swear an oath by him who lives forever and ever, who created the heaven what is in it, and all these things. It's God. And so what we see in over here in chapter 10 is that this angel swears by God, and the thing that he swears, that in the day of the seventh trumpet, The mystery of God will be fulfilled just as it has been announced to his servants, the prophets. That is critical. What that tells us is that everything in Revelation is old. This isn't new information. It's old in the sense that it has been there in the prophets already. And this might sound weird if we're not used to viewing the Bible this way, but I think I've said before that Revelation was the book that showed me that the Bible all fits together. I need all of it. Because if I don't know the prophets, then how am I going to understand the fulfillment of everything that has been announced to the Lord's servant, the prophets? Paul is going to say the same thing. If you look over in Romans chapter 1, Paul says the same thing about the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures. So Paul is saying that the gospel itself is not new. Right? The information that the gospel, the Messiah is coming, that he will redeem all nations, that all people will come to the Lord through Messiah, that's not new information. Right? It's in the prophets. And so here John is saying the same thing that Paul has already said. And so we have to then begin to view the Bible differently. We have to view the Bible as an interconnected series of books. It's a single book that has 66 parts that are linked together through prophecy and fulfillment, and you can't have one part without the other. I've heard people say before, and I've probably said myself, that I just need the New Testament and I can get by. You can't. You cannot, because you can't understand the New Testament without the Old. That's why you have all of the books and not just 27. And so that's critically important that we begin to view the Bible in a biblical way, that the prophets are telling us these things. And what we're seeing in Revelation chapter 10 is that God is finally now done waiting. And what has been foretold is going to come to pass. And so when he's talking about these things, we're probably dealing with judgment. God is incredibly patient with the people of Israel. For example, in Exodus chapter 32, when they come before the mountain and they build a golden calf, God comes to Moses and he says, I'm going to destroy them all and make a new nation out of you. And Moses says, please don't do that. In Numbers chapter 14, verses 11 through 12, when the people of Israel listen to the bad report from 10 of the spies and decide that they're going to kill Moses and Joshua and Caleb and they're going to go back to Egypt and be slaves, God says, Moses, I'm going to kill them all and I'm going to make a new nation out of you. And Moses says, please don't do that. And the Lord relents. Moses is an intercessor. And it seems like what God is telling us here is that there is a day coming when this announced destruction will be fulfilled. Moses in Deuteronomy says, I have put before you today life and death, blessing and curses, choose life. Right? This is a theme that runs all through the text. Life and death are before you, choose life. And the people of Israel continually choose death. Jesus is before them, life. Barabbas, a murderer. Jesus, the tree of life. Barabbas, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the people cry out for Barabbas. They choose death. And so judgment is coming. Jesus tells a parable of the tenants, how they kill the son, and they say, now everything will be ours. And then Jesus turns to his audience and says, what do you think the owner will do with those wicked tenants? And the response is, he will cast them out and find new people. That's what's coming. That is the judgment that is coming because Jesus was rejected. Now again, this is not anti-Semitic. It's really important that we say that because if you get to Revelation chapter 21, where are the Gentiles? There are none. Everybody now is a Jew. Right? Everybody in the new heavens, the new earth, the new Jerusalem that comes down, you are in this new Israel. And so it's not anti-Semitic. It is judgment that is coming upon a people who have rejected the Lord. And the angel swears an oath saying it is going to be fulfilled. So now this voice from heaven speaks again. Take the scroll that is open and eat it. It's probably not what you expected, right? If you haven't read this before, and here's this scroll, the angel's holding it, and then John is told to eat it. Take and eat. It's going to make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet like honey. So what we're seeing here is that John eats the book. And this is reminiscent of Ezekiel, right? Ezekiel is going to be told to do the same thing. Let's go over to Ezekiel chapter 3. Ezekiel chapter 3, he said to me, son of man, eat whatever you find here. Eat this scroll. Speak to the house of Israel. So here's a prophecy that Ezekiel is going to eat and then make known to the people. So I opened my mouth and he gave me the scroll to eat. He said, son of man, feed your belly with the scroll that I give you. I ate it and it was in my mouth and it was sweet as honey. Then he said to me, son of man, go to the house of Israel. Speak my words to them. For you are not sent to a people of foreign speech, a hard language, but to the house of Israel. Surely if I sent you, right, verse 7 or 6, surely if I sent you to those other foreign nations, they would listen. But the house of Israel will not be willing to listen to you because they have a hard forehead and a stubborn heart. So here's Ezekiel. He eats this scroll. He's told to go prophesy to the people of Israel about the judgment that is coming. That gets you into the mark that is put on their heads and then the destruction that goes out in chapter 4. And if we go then back to Revelation chapter 10, we've got the same thing here. In verse 8, we have John eating a scroll. Immediate is in his mouth, sweet as honey, and then it makes his stomach bitter. And then he is told in verse 11, you must again go prophesy. But this is to many peoples and nations and languages and kings, whereas Ezekiel was limited just to the people of Israel. So then we have to deal with that. Yeah, we've got this picture, right? We have John going out and he's going to be prophesying again, but it's a little bit different than Ezekiel. So what is going on? This is one of the reasons, not the reason, not even the strongest reason, but one of the reasons that I think this book is written earlier rather than later, is John has to go prophesy again. And so this could be referring to what is going to come in chapters 12 and following. It could also be referring to John going out again after he leaves Patmos, after his visions, after he writes the book of Revelation, to go prophesy again. And tradition tells us that he did that. He gets off the island, he goes, and he teaches again. And if this is written around 95 AD, John would be very aged. And history tells us that at that point, he could barely speak and he had to be carried from place to place. Seems an unlikely messenger. And so it seems much more likely that if there is another prophetic journey that John is going to go on, that it would be when he was younger rather than when he was older. It could also just be the rest of the book of Revelation, and people have gone, again, both ways. And so we have to be careful not to be so adamant about a particular understanding so long as it allows us to make the correct applications. And so we've got this parallel to Ezekiel, which is a warning for the people. And here in verse 11, this seems to be a warning for all the nations. It's going to be a warning for all the nations. Because if there is this judgment coming upon Jerusalem, then there is a destroying mountain. And whenever a destroyer comes, they are eventually destroyed. Because when you enter into the service of the Lord, you are made holy. And then if you no longer behave in a holy way, then you also will be judged. You can see this with Babylon. She comes as the destroying mountain, and God says, I'm going to destroy you, oh, destroying mountain. You can see that in Jeremiah 51. It talks about the coming destruction upon the Babylonians. In verses 6 through 10, the Lord has used Babylon, and he would have healed her. He would have healed her, but she wouldn't. And so there is left no medicine to cure her sickness, no cure for her wounds. In verse 11, the Lord then will bring vengeance upon Babylon for destroying his temple, but not becoming holy themselves. And this is important, right? Because we're going to see these kind of shifting images throughout the book of Revelation, where Israel destroys the temple of the Lord. When did they do that? Jesus was the temple, right? They destroyed his body, but Jesus rebuilt it. So in that moment, when Israel comes to Jesus as the destroying mountain, Israel is Babylon. In chapter 11, they're going to be Egypt and Sodom. Rome, when Rome comes as a destroying nation, physically destroying the temple, they come as the destroying mountain of Babylon. Well, those nations that do not make themselves holy will then become destroyed themselves. Verse 24 through 26, destruction is coming for Babylon, and that destruction, this is Jeremiah chapter 51, verses 24 through 26, that destruction will be complete. And so here, this prophecy to the peoples, nations, languages, and kings, it could be about that. The parallel to Ezekiel probably makes all of this a warning of coming destruction. And there's a very powerful passage, again, in the prophet Jeremiah in chapter 18, starting in verse 5, that we'll finish with, because this is one of the important applications for us. Right? I don't know who the destroying mountains are. I don't know who the great Babylons are. Any nation in power, any nation being oppressive, any nation that is turned away from the Lord. This is for them. Right? Then the word of the Lord came to me, O house of Israel. Can I not do with you as this potter has done, declares the Lord? Behold, like the clay in the potter's hand, so you are in my hand, O house of Israel. If at any time I declare concerning a nation or a kingdom that I will pluck up and break down and destroy it, and if that nation, concerning which I have spoken, turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I intended to do to it. And if at any time I declare concerning a nation, a kingdom that I will build and plant it, if it then does evil in my sight, not listening to my voice, then I will relent of the good that I had intended to do to it. Now therefore say to the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, thus says the Lord, behold, I am shaping disaster against you and devising a plan against you. Return everyone from his evil way. Amend your ways and your evil deeds. But they will say that is in vain. We will follow our own plans. And will everyone act according to the stubbornness of his evil heart? God says that he does that with all the nations. And when you think about the trajectory of nations throughout history, there tend to be periods of great revival, of great turning to the Lord, of people coming, desiring to know the Lord. There's that picture in the prophets, in the prophet Zechariah, with 10 Gentiles coming to a man, grabbing on his cloak, saying, take us, we know that the Lord is with you, take us to your temple. But when those nations turn away, when they act, everyone according to their own desire, to their own traditions, to their own thoughts, when they leave what God has given us, the result is always judgment. And this is the application. That whatever nation we find ourselves in, we must be busy about our Father's business. I'm not saying that we are to legislate. I'm not saying that we are to legislate Christianity. Not the case at all. But we must be about our Father's business of finding that harvest that is white, ready to be reaped, finding men and women across whatever nation you live in, teaching them about Jesus, the Lamb that was slain and yet lives, bringing them to the Father through Christ by the power of the Spirit, uniting them then with God so that they can take on the characteristics of God himself, becoming the Lord's faithful servants. So that then, as a people, they will desire the Lord. They will want to know his teachings. They will want to grab on to the cloak of a teacher saying, bring me to the Lord. That is what we must be doing, because that is the only way to avert the disaster that the Lord brings upon nations, that he builds up and plucks down. And the application then is that wherever we find ourselves, one of the best things that you can do for the welfare of the nation that you live in is to teach people about Jesus. In all of this destruction that is coming, there is one way of salvation, and he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one gets to the Father but by him. While it is terrifying, while it makes our stomach sour, the premise of salvation is sweet in the mouth. And so it is bittersweet. But we have hope. We know that in Christ alone, our hope is found. And so we look to him for our salvation, to take away the judgment, to cure our wounds, to heal our sickness, the great physician. And so we'll continue with that vein next week. We're going to look at the seventh trumpet. It will not be good. But if you are a believer, if you have the seal on your forehead, then you are safe. And ultimately, that's what we know as believers, that we are safe. And we will continue with the book of Revelation next week. God bless you. I hope this is helpful. I hope that in spite of the judgment, it is encouraging and encourages us to keep our faith no matter the circumstance. God bless you all, and I love you.